Hey guys! Hello, gorgeous. Time for another Patreon special mission. This request comes from general level patron supporter Hector M. Martinez. Hector is a retired police officer, and he says one of his inspirations for becoming a cop was COPS, Central Organization of Police Specialists. With the success of G.I. Joe and Transformers, Hasbro tried to branch out to new boys' toy lines in the 80s, hoping to catch lightning in a bottle a third time. In 1986, it was Inhumanoids.
You can't escape Metlord!
Which were awesome, but flopped. In 1987, it was Visionaries. Which were awesome, but flopped. Hasbro tried to start from scratch again with a new line in 1988 with Cops and Crooks.
Give up, you crooks! You're surrounded by the cops!
The figures were similar in design to the Joes, but twice as big, and quite a bit more muscular. This may have been due to the fact that kids who grew up on G.I. Joes were growing up too, and the idea might have been to have the toys grow in size with them to keep things in proper playing scale. I loved these toys as a kid, and my favorite part of them wasn't the size. It was the cap firing action! Most toys you had to add your own sound effects. Pew pew! Pew pew pew! But Cops and Crooks left nothing to the imagination with their cap firing weapons and vehicles. These were sure to add excitement and intensity to any play session, as well as scare the heck out of moms and cats worldwide. The first wave of figures released in 1988 included 7 single-carded Cops and 5 Crooks figures. Like Joe's, each cop had a code name and a file name. However, the file names for the Cops are a little more pun-tastic than the generally realistic-sounding names created by Larry Hama for the G.I. Joe file cards. The bios on the cards are a little more mature than the cartoon, which was being produced by Deke instead of Sunbow at that point. Even though Cops took place in the future time, a lot of the aesthetics took their cue from the past, the 1950s and before. This is especially evident in costumes like Buttons McBoom Boom, a classic-style gangster, and Long Arm's retro-looking beat cop look. The tone of the show often had this 20s to 50s gumshoes and gangsters vibe as well. G.I. Joes were recruited from every division of the military, and so Cops agents were selected from all of the different law enforcement agencies. On the Cops force, there was the leader, Federal Agent Baldwin P. Vess. Get it? B.P. Vess, as in Bulletproof Vest. His code name? Bulletproof.
It's crime fighting time!
On Bulletproof's file card, it says his cybernetics were a result of being gunned down by Big Boss's henchmen in an alley. Yet on the cartoon, it's a result of colliding with a wall that was sort of Turbo's fault. But Turbo had jumped from the speeding vehicle at that point, so it wasn't like he directly did it. The G.I. Joe cartoon wasn't exactly PG-13 either, but the Cops cartoon took the camp and slapstick to a new level, with lots of wah 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 moments.
Eat lead, cop. Huh? Where's my machine gun?
Sergeant Mace, a former drill instructor in the Marines, came from the Philadelphia SWAT.
Freeze! We're cop, yikes! Then you're under arrest!
You can't have an elite cops unit without a beat cop.
You and I are gonna take a trip down to the station.
Officer P.J. O'Malley, codename Long Arm.
Why do they call you Long Arm?
Both for being the personification of being the long arm of the law, and also for his power cuffs, which could cuff crooks from long distances. Barricade came from Detroit Metro and specialized in crowd control.
Meet Mr. Mule.
There was the K-9 unit Bowser and his cybernetic pooch Blitz, who featured his own police beacon.
Have you picked up their trail?
The motorcycle cop Highway, whose real surname of Harrelson is a combination of Harley and Davidson.
This is Highway. Road ready and rolling.
And the Texas Sheriff, Walker Calhoun, codename Sundown.
You're under arrest.
There were 5 vehicles released in the first wave, 3 of them cops vehicles, and 2 of them included figures. The Ironsides Armored Assault was like a one-man APC, although another figure could be mounted in the back to man the gun. Included was Hardtop from the Chicago PD.
Hardtop here. The Blur Bandit's going south on Thunder Road. I'm in pursuit.
The Air Raid helicopter included Bullseye, whose file name of Hugh S. Sikorsky was changed to Hugh Forward in the cartoon.
Berserkle and Crusher, you are under arrest for sabotage.
The Air Raid had a cockpit on either side to hold an additional figure. The third vehicle was the Blue Streak motorcycle.
Highway here. I've spotted robbery suspects on Tier 35 Expressway. I'm in pursuit.
Which you would think would include Highway, but for some reason didn't. And also strange is Highway isn't even pictured on the box. The Blue Streak featured a sidecar to hold an extra figure. Unlike Inhumanoids and Visionaries, Cops weren't an immediate financial disappointment and did receive a second wave of figures, which were released later in 1988. There were 7 single-carded Cops new recruits. Apes from Boston PD, who reminds me a bit of Centurions with his peg holes and attachable robotic components.
Extreme!
LAPD's communication officer, Airwave, whose file name is actually Roger Wilco.
Fellow cops, this is truly spectacular!
There's Checkpoint, the MP, whose real name is Wayne Sneeden III. And if you're a super G.I. Joe fan, that name might sound familiar.
What's this all about?
Checkpoint's file card states that he's a 5th-generation career soldier. His father served with a top-secret anti-terrorist unit during the 80s and 90s. G.I. Joe was a top-secret anti-terrorist unit during the 80s and 90s, and there was one particular ranger on that roster named Wayne Sneeden, codename Beachhead.
Yo, Joe!
Even though Hasbro owned both properties, there are probably rights issues at play here, stopping G.I. Joe from specifically being mentioned on a Cops file card, although this is a really cool sneaky way of incorporating Cops into the Hasbro shared universe. I think it's awesome that one of the Cops is the son of a G.I. Joe.
You don't want to leave the party so soon.
Although it's a little peculiar that they picked Beachhead of all the Joes.
What?
You'd think it would have been Hawk or Duke or even Law since he was an MP like Checkpoint.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to see that one of you's a real trooper.
There's Seattle PD's Taser, file name High Watts. Get it? High Watts.
Let's get those crooks before they cause any more damage.
And the bomb defusal expert, Dudley Defuse. Codename
Call me Powder Keg.
the martial arts expert from Honolulu, Hawaii, Nightstick. Since every team needs a ninja-type guy.
Nice to have you back.
Oh, thanks, Nightstick. Nice to be back.
Look out!
And not all Cops members had to be from law enforcement. There was also Inferno, the firefighter.
Well, somebody's got to say it. It's crime fighting time!
Kinda makes you wonder if we would have seen more public servants in future waves. Like First Class, the mailman.
But only 3 wear the green beret.
Once again, there were 3 Cops vehicles released in Wave 2. 2 of them included figures. There was the Armored Tactical Attack Craft, also known as the Attack, which had a space in the back for incarcerated crooks. Behind the wheel was Heavyweight. Then there was the Highway Interceptor, with Officer Charles Cruz. Codenamed Roadblock. I get why some trademarks had to be reused, but I was never a fan of it. And the third vehicle was the Pursuit Jet, which seems to be Airwave's vehicle of choice. Hasbro pulled the plug on the line after the release of the second wave of toys, but pictures of unproduced prototypes of Wave 3 surfaced. Once again, 7 Cops figures were planned: Sergeant Stone, State Trooper Ironhammer, Search and Seizure Hound Dog, Gang Control Streetwise, Inner City Urban Assault Vowels. Vowels? A Clanker droid, which looks more like a crook character to me than a cop, and a new government agent named G-Man, who bore a resemblance to the last Fed, Bulletproof. Was he supposed to take over command of Cops, much like Hasbro would have new characters take over G.I. Joe every few years? And hey, no Mountie? There was one on the cartoon.
Yukon the Mountie.
I'm surprised there wasn't one released in Wave 2, or at least planned for Wave 3. There were also deluxe cap-firing backpacks planned, the Urban Defender for the Cops. What I find most strange about this assortment of figures, both released and unreleased, is there were no female figures released. They certainly had female characters on the show that figures could have been based on, like Mainframe and Nightshade, but they never made it to the pegs. It makes even less sense since the Cops roster was diverse, and it was one of the few toy lines of the 80s to feature an African American as their leader, so it's not like they were afraid to go against trends. There wasn't an abundance of female Joes, but Scarlet, Lady J, and CoverGirl were important additions to the Joe team, and taught me as a kid that women can be just as strong, intelligent, focused, and intense as men, and I can't think of a reason why there wasn't a female cop figure. Other than the standard one a Hasbro suit would likely give, it wouldn't sell.
Sorry, Mirage.
After the short runs of Inhumanoids and Visionaries, I was glad to see Cops at least warrant a second wave. And while the cartoon didn't live up to the Hasbro Sunbow shows for me, it did last 65 episodes, the magic number of a lot of successful 80s toy-based shows. If you're like me and you don't think the quality of the Deke series measures up to the Hasbro Sunbow shows of the past, at least Cops has quantity going for it. Dozens of hours of Bulletproof, Long Arm, Highway, Mace, and the rest fighting crime in a future time. One thing I thought was awesome about the cartoon was the theme. The iconic theme was composed by Shuki Levy, who was responsible for some of the best cartoon themes of the 80s, including He-Man,
And the Masters of the Universe.
She-Ra, Inspector Gadget, and my two favorites, Mask and Jace and the Wheeled Warriors. If you're more of a reader than a TV watcher, there was a 15-issue run of Cops comics. These were put out by DC instead of Marvel, which was still putting out G.I. Joe and Transformers at the time. The DC comic series retained some of the humor style of the Deke cartoon, but had a bit more serious tone. The designs of the characters and the vehicles were much more true to the toys than the cartoon as well, which would often totally change the color of the outfits and hair. If you always wished Cops had a tone more similar to the Sunbow or Marvel Comics G.I. Joe, the DC comic series is what you're looking for. Just good luck finding it. And that's the history of Cops. Interested in seeing the history of crooks? Become a Patreon General or Ninja level supporter and give the orders. Or you can request any other review of the 80s Toy Museum or a top 5 list. Got something to report? Scroll down and go to town. And to join the tribe, hit subscribe. Nerdmaste.